Hang up. Well, hey everyone, it's Christy, and annoyingly, I just did another hangout where I do set it up very last minute, and nobody knows it's coming, and then you happen to be on YouTube or not, and you either watch it or you don't. But I am happy today to do another spontaneously scheduled. It was planned long before, but I didn't actually set it up. Hangout with Sonia of An Actual Joke, a channel that is new to YouTube, but one that's gotten a lot of attention and has gotten for very good reason, and is definitely one of the people I would count among like the progressive side of the YouTube community, putting out amazing content and a perspective that I think we could all benefit from a really wise place. So Sonia, welcome
Hi.
to my show, my channel.
Hi. Thanks for having me. I'm I'm uh I'm very glad to be here. I just great. Now my brain's shutting off. Great. Fuck.
That's okay. That's no
Um.
worries. I have that happen actually usually at least once per hangout. So if you get it out of the way now, then it's done
Yeah.
for the rest of it.
Okay.
I wanted to have you on one because I've got lots of friends who are people that I respect a lot that are into anarchism. And to be honest, and I was saying this off air, I study elections and election behavior, and I'm very good on the stats and the polling and the sampling and all that. But I'm not a political theorist, and I don't know that much about anarchism, and that's something that is something you care about on your channel. So I wanted to talk to you about that. You also have other things though that you're interested in. So let's start first with you said before we came on air, you actually have quite a lot of expertise in video making, editing, processing and stuff, but your channel is the first time you really started to, on a consistent basis, turn out finished products. And I get that because that's what I feel like it was an accomplishment, I still, it feels like an accomplishment to get a video done. But take us back through, your introduction to YouTube, who influenced you, and why you decided to make your channel about 6 months ago. So please tell us the story.
Okay. So first, I'd like to address the air quotes consistent schedule. That my schedule is about as consistent as my entire uh like motivational issues, but like that's a different story. But I've been doing video editing and worked in the film industry for about like 7 years. I've been doing freelance editing for like 5+ years. I've been editing since I was 11 years old, which is which is a very long time. And so I've just been thinking, like, I see, like, I originally saw, like, I originally was brought into this circle by Libertarian Socialist Rants, and then followed by watching Kevin Logan's videos and H Bomber Guy's videos, and I was seeing, like, there's a perspective here that I don't see that much, and that's the perspective of mine, which is something that's coming as a trans woman and as a queer anarchist that isn't really represented, and I think that it's something that should be done. And I also have this video editing expertise that I haven't used. I haven't used it at all, and like I've been doing completely. I was up until that point I'd been doing films and projects and all these things that I never saw through. I never saw through to either a second thing or to a finished product. And so I decided with my first one, I had this brilliant idea, brilliant quote unquote, for a series I'd call the YouTube Red Scare, where I address like the Red Scare on YouTube, and it's also a pun because YouTube Red Scare. But then I thought, who's the perfect target to take down in the first video? And I thought, I see a lot of misrepresentations of Antifa, and that's something I am very involved in, anti-fascism, and that's like a core tenet of my beliefs as a Jew and as an anarchist. I think anti-fascism is like probably the most important thing in my political activism. But I'd like to say first and foremost that like I chose Sargon for my first video because I knew that would get me notoriety, and because I knew he not only that, he gave me the perfect video in that he understood nothing about the topic and acted like he did.
So every video, basically, but one
Yes,
on the topic that you cared about.
one on a topic that I could address.
Right, right. Yeah, and so Tia, tell us a little bit about that first video, and then when you finish up that story, I'd like to come back and speak to you about Antifa and anti-fascism, because that's also another topic that I haven't had enough opportunity to unpack on my channel. And with your commitment and your feelings on that, then it would be an opportunity I would be an idiot to pass up. So, but let's stick with one thing at a time. So your first video, how was it in terms of like the getting it out there and getting it published, and then also what kind of reception did you get?
Well, initially it took me a month to write the script at first because I revised it over and over and over and over again because I kept worrying that I wasn't saying what I wanted to correctly. And even now I have qualms about what I said. But now I think the best part about that video is I still had my pacing and editing correct from even then, that my pacing was still there. And that pacing stuck with me throughout this whole process, where my pacing structure is keep point joke point joke, and then keep doing that until you've reached the end, and try to end it with like either a big bang, or end it with or taper it off into nothing. And that's the way I try to structure videos. And so with that, I've been thinking, I thought, what could I do to it took me after working on it for months, I thought maybe this isn't worth it, you know, it's not going to be a good response. But then I decided, I finished this, I'm going to upload it anyways. And I actually, the first person I actually like talked to from the community was Ben from Anti-Social Media, and he like mirrored my first video and like got me some notoriety, and like it like got me like acknowledged. And then also Sargon commented on my video, which was like, ooh. And I thought, and he said he was going to respond. And like he never ended up doing that because I don't know, he had like something better to do.
Easier
but he said,
to do something less hard.
But essentially, the video got a very negative response. I'm still getting comments to this day telling me that I should I'm such a cuck and I should die. But I've just like filtered them out on that video and just don't let them be uploaded. And so they think that the comments there, but it's not.
Yeah, shadow banning.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's some lonely people out there going, I'm going to type this awesome comment and then everyone's going to like it. And then nobody likes it because nobody sees it. They're just yelling to themselves in a room of one. Sorry, go ahead.
And then, so that was, so that's pretty fun that I still get like comments to this day telling me that I got this thing wrong, or that like I'm so dumb and I should die. And it's great. Because like I've gotten it took me a while to get to this point, but after that first video, like I immediately developed like a bulletproof skin with these comments, like because they're just so pathetic. Like they kept like throwing them at me and nothing really got through, because like even though I like struggle with my own personal life of some like emotional issues that I'm not going to talk about that much, I'm kind of open about that, but I don't talk about that much. But like what I noticed is with these comments, the first time I got a hate comment, I was like, wow, that's really pathetic. And so from that point forward, that kind of like emboldened me to keep going. And I immediately like in the next week made like a small video where like I tried to like summarize the like history of like internet right-wing movements from like 2009 onwards, starting with the New Atheist movement, in that like gradually progressed rightward until we got to Gamergate, where it was a big shift to the right, and then how we even got there, and how we could analyze that, and how Gamergate affected online political culture to a massive extent. And that was just a 2-minute video, and I felt like I analyzed a lot with that. It's technically episode 1.5 of the YouTube Red Scare. Also, episode 3 is being worked on, but it's like 40 minutes long at this point, so I have to cut it down or either take a long time for it. But the YouTube Red Scare, then I followed it up with episode 2, which I increased my production values on because I felt like I needed to, and I increased more and more and more until I got to this point with the Mouthy Buddha video, where now I'm like working mostly in After Effects, and it's like a lot of ridiculous things that I'm doing just to like style over these people. And I feel like I need to do that, because if there's no style, what's the point? Like that's my own personal philosophy. That's not something I apply to everyone, because there are obviously like points of like having genuine points, and I'll listen to them from other people. But for myself, if I don't have a style going, I don't see a point.
Right. And that's also interesting too, because you're so you're bringing in a whole bunch of different skill sets and now also technical packages to work with that too. So you're probably going to more than anyone like really shoot up in terms of production value in very short periods of time. But just to give people an idea of what it's like when a 10-minute video drops. And by the way, can I just say also I really enjoy anti-social media, and I know he's having kind of struggles now, not struggles, but you get to a point sometimes where when you want subs and they're not coming as fast, it can get really disheartening. And
Yeah, shout out to
so,
any social media. If you're not
yeah,
already subscribed, go check him out. He's hilarious.
precisely.
Uh,
Yeah. But on that, how long does it take you, like I mean, for averages, or take a case study of just one, but when it goes from idea to writing to recording to editing and production and release, give us a sense of how much time a video you might have taken in the past to do those steps.
so in the past, like when I started out, video ideas would come in like either like in the middle of the day or in the middle of the night when I was doing something important. Um, and I'd write them down on my
I know
phone,
that feeling. I know
and
that
then
feeling.
I'd work on them later. And then when I finally got to them, it would take it'd take anywhere from like 2 days to write a script to like 3 weeks. This current episode 3 script is like taking me like 4 months, and it's on conspiracies, uh, like conspiracy theorists,
Right. So
and it's like
lots of
kind of feature length, uh, but like these uh so for just like getting through to the recording process, the voice recording process, I used to do them in a day, and now I do them in like over a week, because I have to like make sure that like I get it right, because I've been trying to fix my speed, because I have a tendency to talk really fast.
I
But
know
like,
I brought this up with you too because I sorry to interrupt you, but I'm going to. Yeah, I think what I actually found the perfect pacing. And I maybe you saw this, but Earworm, the woman who does the Vox series Earworm. I don't know if you're at all familiar with it. It's phenomenal, and it's about hip hop. And I know I'm a middle-aged white woman, but through her journey of introducing me to artists and the techniques of it and the logic of it, or the structures of it and the way it all gets put together and how to appreciate it, I'm really getting like an aesthetic appreciation for hip hop. But yeah, she's got this sort of very slow paced, sort of not breathy, but definitely up to the mic close, casual. And I always felt that your stuff, it would be like more like on the nerd writer kind of, like he actually speaks faster than I think you should. I think the earworm Vox person has that pace, and I know that you speak fast. I know I have that problem too. Part of the time I've got so many thoughts in my head that I want to get through that I skip words, in order to get to the point that I want to make without actually taking everybody through my logic. So I do
yeah,
that, I know, when I talk. And of course, the other thing too is you've got a lot of content to get through, right? And her with music, and she can do a lot of stuff visually that alleviates some of the content that she needs to communicate. But yeah, I think because you've got this sort of, it's a silky voice. So I think it
thank
would
you.
be.
Well, what I think is what I tried to do my hardest with the mouthy Buddha video is like I tried to slow down so much, because it was just like I knew I was going fast, so I hope that was an improvement. Um,
It was, but even more. I know that is
um,
hard, but even more. But yeah, I mean, I appreciate. I had to learn how to slow down, and it feels so unnatural. This is it. I've noticed it watching newscasters as well, even watching President Trump. When you watch people who have to speak professionally, one of the things that I've started to notice, and I'm actually doing it deliberately right now, is that they speak much more slowly than a regular conversation would go, and they actually sort of make a point of pronouncing the words all the way to the end, which Americans often don't do, maybe North Americans, and so the pacing of that feels very artificial, and it feels like people are going to be bored. But what it ends up really doing is allowing people to catch up with what's in your head. I mean, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. I'm just recognizing that for me too, slowing down has been a struggle, and I could probably use doing it even maybe a little bit more in some of my live hangouts where I do go to conversation speeds. In fact, one of my German colleagues said that he had dropped into a video that I had done and just was watching it, and he said, "You speak so much more quickly in your videos than you do at the office," and that's because I know I'm around non-native English speakers all the time. And so I do make an effort to not speak at normal English speed because I'm assuming everyone is, not everyone is going to be fluent in understanding my English. But yeah, slowing down. Sorry, I got a little bit of a word in there, but I want you to finish your thought and then we're going to come back to Antifa.
Yeah. And then like with all these video productions, like the actual editing can take um anywhere from depending on my motivation, depending on my motivation, the editing can take anywhere from like a day to a week to 3 weeks. The Mali Buddha video actually took like a month to actually edit because it was just like a lot of like rewatching and rewatching and rewatching and trying to find the right clips to put in and the right way to frame something.
Yeah, I get that. And I appreciate it too when I see it on the screen. I really do.
And so yeah, that's all I have to say is like the actual editing process takes like a long time. But sometimes it can be fast, but a lot of times it's very slow because like I won't feel confident in the way that an edit works, and so I'll recut it and recut it and recut it to get the rhythm right. Because with editing, there's a very specific rhythm that is mostly in film, but in video essay, it's also important to have this rhythm because if you're not either cutting to the music or cutting to the action or cutting to the point, you're not cutting right.
I feel like we should have a class, a master class, and you can give the lessons, and we'll go. Wow, I edit my videos for shit. But yeah, so thanks for that. So basically, I think it is sometimes easy to just consume a video and think, oh, that wasn't so much work, and not really understanding all the thought and planning and evaluation and retrying and redoing that goes into it. So thanks for that. Yeah, you mentioned that anti-fascism was a very important part of your part of your world value system. So for those people who like really don't have, sorry, for those individuals who have only a, you know, a media impression of Antifa and anti-fascism, why don't, if you could give us your perspective on what it means to be both anti-fascist and Antifa.
So anti-fascist itself is just a declaration that you will not tolerate fascism in any form and in any way of it achieving power. That is what it means to me, is that you will do your best to prevent the rise of fascism. What Antifa itself is an organization. Well, it's not an organization. It's a tactic. What it is a tactic that multiple organizations across the world use. These organizations use the tactic of the Black Bloc and Antifa. Antifa is only a tactic. It's anyone who calls it an organization clearly doesn't know what they're talking about, because the actual theory behind Antifa and like the tactics and the theory behind anti-fascism is inherently just tactics and not an actual cohesive like organization. If it were a cohesive organization, there would have been a tracking down of who leads it a long time ago, but no one can find it because it's not. See, the idea is it's to represent a resistance. It's to represent an active resistance that will take down your platform, that will take you down in order to stop you from being a public fascist, because we will not allow the ideology to spread. Back when I was more able-bodied, I took part in Black Bloc protests myself, but now I can't anymore. But because when I took part in them, a lot of people didn't understand the point behind them is, and I know I just like spoiled my anonymity in that protest, but I'm not naming out who else was there, so it's fine.
I don't even know what protest you're talking about, because don't tell, don't say.
I'm not going to say, because
yeah. So it was a protest that happened in the past. There we
Yeah.
go. So
Um, but this idea of like Antifa being an organization is ridiculous. It's a tactic that's just designed to uh really is to maintain the status quo. Usually Antifa are most members are on the left and want to move forward beyond the status quo, but what it really does is it maintains the status quo of like liberal democracy be no and that's the goal of it. It's there's no more to it than to just prevent the slide right of the Overton window. However, that doesn't it's really hard to do that in America because America has an inherent right-wing slide in its politics, and the Overton window is constantly shifting right, and any attempts to pull it leftwards is seen as terrorism or seen as extremism, even if it's just minute details, or if it's actual maintaining of the centrism of the Overton window. It seems like it's a radical left proposition, but it's not really. It's to prevent the slide rightward. And that's all it really is and the goal of Antifa is to prevent a slide rightward.
right. And can you give some examples of what thing, people have seen Antifa protesting Milo, but in terms of fascism and opposing it, what forms does fascism take that that an Antifa action would work to oppose, and how you kind of like make the connection, if you could, between the anti-fascist value and the actions, where they're directed and how they're selected, and on what basis do you call them fascist?
So first, the Milo thing, that was like the thing with Milo was about protecting trans and undocumented students. It wasn't about him being a fascist. It was about him about to like reveal information. So that was just
Right.
people in Black Bloc protesting. It wasn't really an Antifa
right.
organization of the tactic, but people say it was because they were in Black Bloc, so because they don't understand how it works. Uh, but the entire idea of anti-fascist praxis, which is to shut down fascists and give them no platform, results in the use of violence in some cases. Like, for example, not the first time Richard Spencer was punched, but the second time when he was talking about how Trump's involvement in Syria was bad, which I somewhat agree with, but I don't agree with why Richard Spencer said it. Richard Spencer said it because he wants the Assad regime to be protected because it's a dictatorship, and he wants that to stay in power, and he wants Trump to focus on only American issues because he's a nationalist and stuff like that. But essentially, he was spreading fascist propaganda also by saying things like, well, we need to focus on the real American values. Wink, wink. Dog whistle. Real America. Dog whistle. And anytime Richard Spencer's talking, and trying to make a public statement, it's a perfect chance to shut him down, which is what Antifa did, because they chased him around and made him scared. And the second time he was punched, it was like he had glitter thrown on him. He was made to be humiliated so he wouldn't come back out. The idea is taking away his platform and taking away his wants to be on platform. However, this didn't completely work because he's been still active, but you can tell he's not as emboldened as he was before, because he keeps getting protested and he keeps getting, ignored or countered with either chants or drowning him out or threats of violence to take away his platform. And I think that violence in political terms is something to be saved for people who are specifically fascists. And the reason I can say Richard Spencer confidently is a fascist is because of his economic policies in combination with his racism, with his white supremacy, with all of these things combined, in combination with his economic policy, which his economic policy is designed to cement the powers of capital, it's designed to cement the establishment of the state and capitalism working together to sustain themselves while everyone else is subjugated. Like, the working class is subjugated. There is no more middle class in fascism, and everyone works for the rich. everyone works. Everyone is a wage slave, and everyone has to just submit and to the state. And there's always a scapegoat. And in Richard Spencer's case, he chooses the classic scapegoat of the Jews, but also he chooses the Muslims and the brown people and the black people and the foreigners. Essentially, he's already made his scapegoats everyone who's not white.
Right. Maybe it would also help to understand, so Antifa doesn't come out to protest, to work against Republicans or libertarians. What is it about fascism that the anti-fascist movements find so dangerous to kind of warrant this kind of special singling out of attention and revulsion and desire for public rejection?
Well, there's this idea of the marketplace of ideals, and this is something inherent to neoliberalism. The marketization of ideas is something that comes out of neoliberalism and how that works. The marketization of ideas is like the marketization of everything in neoliberalism. Everything's a market, and so the marketplace of ideas, the market will solve it. However, what we notice in the trend of history is that when fascism is given a platform, even when people are trying to stop it but don't successfully shut down their platform, fascist ideas spread to people no matter what, which is how the Nazis got even got into power. I know someone will shout Godwin's law eventually in the comments, but essentially, the way it's the best example because it's how fascists work. The way it works is the existence of a fascist platform causes this inherent legitimization of their ideology, that they're just as legitimate as them having a platform makes them quote unquote just as legitimate in the marketplace of ideas as a Republican, as a Democrat, as anyone else who's in the marketplace of ideas. However, this ignores the fact that when fascist ideas are put on the table, irrespective of how bad they are, the marketplace of ideas doesn't work. They were bad in the first place. They did not do everything for everyone in the first place, but it did well enough for enough people, and enough people were divided by them that they could take power in Germany. And so it didn't matter that it wasn't the best idea and that most people thought it wasn't the best idea. So the marketplace didn't matter. It was who was in power thought it would protect them, and it was that who was divided couldn't stop them. That is why fascism needs to be resisted, because if it's given a platform to speak, it will divide and conquer.
I think it's important to remember that the way that fascism rose in Germany was by taking over democratic institutions.
Yes, that's another very important point. When fascism is legitimized through elections and electoral politics, that is another way that it is completely on its route to taking over, because the legitimization of fascism, especially through electoral politics, makes it seem as if it's just the natural progression of things. And that's how fascism rises. It just seems like a natural progression to things, then people just accept it. Bad Mouse Productions, before he left, made a video on how The Handmaid's Tale represents this sort of how American fascism could look like, and that's how we could spot fascism. It's very much the way that it came about came about quote unquote out of necessity, and that it was just a natural thing people had to do, which is not true in any case, but that's what they thought, and so they assumed it was necessary.
I think it's important to be mindful of, and I don't think we are, that Putin has an agenda of destroying democracies in the West. And the way that he is doing that is a tried and true method coming right out of the Soviet system, which is divide and conquer, create divisions within a country so that people are so busy consumed with their own arguments and fighting that they can't actually kind of resist Russian advancement on the global stage, because they can't come to domestic agreement. You saw it with Brexit. You're seeing it with attempts to mess with elections in France. You're seeing Putin and the Putin regime. And I want to distinguish between the Russian people and the government. One thing that I've learned from being in Europe and meeting Iraqis and Iranians and people and Cubans, which in Wisconsin I didn't meet a lot of, is that you can't judge an individual by the government that is running their country. And so I don't want to I'm going to try to not just talk about the Russians as if it's an entire nation and talk about Putin, but there is a very self-interested reason why Putin has been supporting white nationalism, has been trying to use our politics to divide us, to use his media to re-echo the idea that our media is not to be trusted. And that's because by divide and conquering us, it makes it easier for him to become the superpower he wants Russia to become again. And allowing and having this incredibly divisive presidential candidate and the forces of, of white supremacy that he is giving a nod and a wink to is not only destructive for us in terms of our own politics and our basic fundamental democracy, but also in the kind of government that we see around the world and people's freedoms globally.
I think I'd also like to address the fact that like irrespective of the Russia funding thing, like it's weird that like Russia is funding all this media, even though their like state is failing and their infrastructure is collapsing and all these things happen. Like it's almost like they only care about the power of the regime and nothing else.
Yeah, what you definitely saw was Putin and his cronies and friends using the structures of capitalism to transform the former, Russia from a former Soviet state into an oligarchy. And that's increasingly where the U.S. is, well, it already is an oligarchy, really. If you look at it, it has been for a while. And so any further erosions of democratic institutions, it seems, I think there's a bit of an illusion, perhaps, and maybe I'm overgeneralizing, but I think Americans generally have a sense that our institutions are eternal. Too many people in the States think that they're God-given and therefore stable. But the fact is that democracy is very fragile because it's built upon the faith and trust of the people in the governmental structures. And the more that we lose faith in our structures and we think that, and we can't trust our fellow citizens, then the more likely we are to see democracy collapse in our lifetime in the United States. And that might sound unthinkable, but we're maybe one massive economic crisis away from that.
I think we very much are. That either one or more economic crises that hit the global stage, and there's a very real chance that fascist politics could rise. But there's also a very real chance that socialist politics could rise because there's a growing popularity in the United States. It's not really socialism; it's social democracy, calling itself democratic socialism. But it's very much a better alternative than fascism, which is something that I don't like. It's the idea of making, instead of because you could even have like a fascist endorsed universal basic income or something like that, but they'll make caveats for it and make it something designed so that marginalized people can't get anywhere. But you could easily see, you cannot see a fascist support real universal healthcare because that's an entitlement. That's a guaranteed thing. So no matter what the market does, you're guaranteed something so that you're no longer relying on markets, which is a left policy, whether it's social democratic onwards to the left. A left policy is like a right to this, a right to this. It's that people have a right to well-being, and that's something that you'll never see in anything that's a right-wing economic system like America or like fascism or like just generally capitalism. You'll never see that because this idea that like the protection of the wealth is so great that you cannot allow for these policies of like rights that allow people to, instead you would want to marketize it, which is what I see happening in states that have had social democratic policies where they have healthcare. I see a rise in like right-wing politicians trying to say, hey, what if we replace this with universal basic income and no longer have this, but say people still have a right and access to healthcare and just privatize the market? But that's something that is like dangerous. And I see the privatization of the NHS in the UK. And that's something that's like, right. That's something that's very clearly, it's something that's going to end up killing people, and it's going to lead us to a division, and we're going to swing hard right or hard left, and it's going to happen. And that's what I think is going to happen. But we need to work on making sure that it does not swing hard right.
I saw a timeline of Hitler's activities once he rose to power. And one of the first pieces of legislation that got passed and enacted was banning unions. Right. So people who think that fascists and communists are the same, no. The point of banning workers' collectives under a fascist government is so that there's no power that can challenge the state. It's not about representation, and it's not about making sure people are heard. It's about obedience and compliance, and I think it's incredibly dangerous potentials that we have going forward. I said, we might not be there now, but the fact is that you have a Trump presidency that is attacking the media, the Lügenpresse, right? Attacking the judicial system and attacking the domestic investigatory structures that are holding him accountable to his campaigns, vast numbers of guilty pleas so far to contacts with Russian operatives and even colluding with Russians or trying to work on to exercise U.S. foreign power while not foreign policy power while not yet being sworn in. So we have this guy who has basically sees state apparatuses as means for his own personal protection and advancement, and you have sometimes between 35 and 40% of the population approving of him. So that's 10%. That's a 10% swing away from a government that always has some sort of strongman at the top rather than a proper democracy. That is actually the reality in which we're living right now, with people who live in the Fox bubble, who reject any legitimate criticism, no matter how much evidence is presented against Roy Moore or against Donald Trump. They're in a cult of personality there. They're supporting the man, not the institutions. And again, this is 36, 37, 38% of the population. Before, when he was just elected, it was, he was up in the mid 40s. So it is not that outrageous idea to think that we could, vote, if enough people voted for Trump another time, that he would then find a way to do what Putin did, which is get around the constitutional prohibition against more than 2 terms as president and find a way to be president for life. I know it sounds a little bit ridiculous, but it's not as ridiculous as it was 4 years ago.
And another thing that is very important to talk about is there's not only just the swing to fascism in Trump alone, there's the swing to fascistic policies. I don't think Trump is currently enacting as a fascist publicly. I don't know what his personal politics are, but he's acting very much in a pseudo proto-fascist sort of ideals, in that he is mirroring very early fascist tactics. But what we also have to keep in mind is the current Republican establishment. I'm not talking about generally people who vote Republican. I'm talking about the people in the Senate and the House the electeds are currently swinging very hard right and cutting with this tax plan. Are going to gut they're going to gut everything. They're going to gut entitlements. They're going to gut because what they're going to do first is they're going to make this tax plan, and then they're going to say, oh, we don't have any money, so we have to privatize Social Security. We have to privatize Medicare and Medicaid. Yeah. And so it's just going to happen, where we're going to see the mass privatization of things, which is something that was coined under Hitler. Is that the idea of privatization of these state-run industries is something that's very important to keep track of, because the more privatized they are, the more chance there is for a state to turn from a republic or a democracy into a fascist dictatorship.
Another point I would make is that if you look at 20th century fascism, you didn't have multinational global industries, companies stretching literally, across the globe in almost every country, or if not in every country in the world. And so 20th century fascism included state sort of control of industry. I think what you have in 21st century fascism is corporate collaboration with fascist supporting or leaning or collaborating government regimes that don't really have, they're perfectly willing to make these people more money. And this is it. I mean, the Republicans in Congress are not looking to pass, fascist legislation explicitly, but what they're doing is every time Trump makes a step farther in the direction of that kind of, well, he's already acting like an authoritarian leader in that way, and to calling on Mueller to resign, or for an investigation of Mueller to discredit his investigation. Republicans who are doing that are enabling that fascist drift because they're not standing up for the Constitution.
And I think that it's like, I think what I can describe it best as is every time Trump takes 2 steps right, the Republican Senate takes 2 steps right and then 1 step back.
Yeah. Precisely.
And they just keep edging it forward to the right, to the right, to the right, until we get to the point where there's so much privatized industry that we just are going to have to, you know, oh, folks, it's only natural. I need to take control of the country for us to keep going. Because if I don't take control of the country, how are we going to keep businesses here?
The thing about the Republicans, especially in this last week, is I think there's a provision in the tax bill to eliminate the individual mandate, right? So they're attacking Obamacare through this bill anyway. So they're looking to kick people off of insurance. They've got a party that has just voted to end net neutrality through the FCC, which is going to make everybody in the United States pay more or have really shitty internet service. And they're creating a bill, they're passing a tax bill that's actually going to raise taxes on their voters and borrow money on the government's credit card in order to give tax breaks to companies that are already in a stock market that is record high, and it's having its corporate tax rates drop to 21%. These are turkeys voting for Christmas. I can't believe that they're going to go back to their constituents and say, we're only going to kick people off of healthcare, raise your taxes, and make you pay more for the internet. Why won't you vote for us in 2018?
I think we need like a serious, like, I think the establishment Democrats are not going to be able to do much for, I think we just need to run as many Democrats as possible on the board. And that means also if like you are a member of the DSA or something, and you want to, and there's no one like being opposed but for the Republicans in your area, just run an opposition campaign. You can even be a write-in or just a miniature campaign, but as long as there's an opposition there, there is a possible likelihood, because a lot of the public is getting fed up with the current administration, and I think there could be a serious swing leftward if we just show up.
In 2 ways, you're right. One is to produce candidates that people can vote for, and 2 is to then show up and actually vote. And I think you're entirely right. I was very fortunate to have gone to the Women's March, and I met Steve Shives there, and he was my March buddy. Hey, Steve, if you're listening. And I have very fond memories of that day because of the energy and the positiveness and the hope that we gave each other on that day, because we looked around at all of the other people there and marveled, I am not alone. I am so not alone in all of this. And one of the great things that came out of the Women's March, despite being criticized by, for instance, Sargon for not having a message, like the idea that we didn't have a coherent single reason that we were marching was a deficiency of the march, when the fact is it was the strength, because we weren't brought there for a single thing, that we agreed on one thing, and then that was the only thing that tied us together. We were there because we opposed the kind of principles that we saw coming at us from this government, from that president. And we were all there for many reasons, for healthcare reasons, for choice reasons, for human rights reasons, for the progressive society where people actually are treated equally, not just some sort of laws that don't get enforced because society maintains all its bigotries. And then we learned about other people's issues, and we started to care about those too. And out of that came a massive candidate recruitment campaign. I think Emily's List and several other people I know, the Bernie supporters had a group that they started to get people to run for office. Hillary's people put together a Run for Anything. There was another third-party group that put together campaigns or educational systems and trainings for how to become a candidate, looking for candidates, recruiting them, grooming them, getting them on school boards, getting them to run for city councils, for state legislatures, and for Congress. And we have seen, I think that there was, I'm remembering it off the top of my head, but it was an article about the number of candidates that were being fielded. And this one group that had been training candidates said they would normally get a couple, like maybe 100 or 200 candidates between a cycle, and they had already taught over 1,000, many of them women, and women from all walks of life. And the amazing thing that I think, 2017, I know at the time the Person of the Year went to the Me Too movement, but we've seen women in America stepping up and stepping forward and enduring, like the women who came out to tell the truth about Roy Moore. They endured death threats and harassment and public revulsion from the people who wanted to protect that sexual predator. But they told the truth, and they stood telling the truth until election day. And on election day, the people of Alabama basically said, "We believe you." And the women who voted, the Black women who turned out like in their power, and Black men too, and people who turned out because they cared about not having a person who thought that that slavery was a time when we had families that were more united. I mean, how can you have that kind of person representing you in the Senate? Of course, we need to go forward. We don't need to go back. So the common concerns of these communities and young people, millennials who are absolutely appalled at the direction they see the party going with its bigotry, and also the fact that their futures are of no concern. The way that they're spending money here with this deficit spending in order to fund tax cuts for the wealthy, I can understand why millennials would be frustrated. So this power, I think, is very much been building up, and when we have had opportunities to see it released in elections like in Virginia and elections like Alabama, Virginia, you had 15 seats in the state legislature flip. 11 of them went to women. We had a trans woman elected. We had first African American women elected to, I think, at least 2 different like executive positions. And we also saw it in, of all places, Alabama. Now, of course, Alabama was a perfect storm because the GOP put up a pedophile. But we still, if it wasn't for having everything right, that victory wasn't going to happen on its own. People had to make that happen. So I do think that 2018 is just going to be a tidal wave election, because there are a lot of people who haven't had a chance to vote their frustrations. And frustration, if Democrats learned anything after Obamacare was enacted, is a great motivator for turnout. And so I think 2018 is going to be a watershed year, definitely.
And I think that another important thing the Democrats need to learn is that if we don't I say we, but if the actual party doesn't give like a solid policy line, like, because like that was my major issue with Hillary Clinton's campaign, is that like even with the meddling the meddling, which is like the Russian meddling, there's just like, it would have been a landslide if she had like there wouldn't have mattered if there was meddling, because it would have had to be so obvious, because like there would have been a landslide if she had the solid policies that I think that she needed, like a declarative policy instead of "we're just not Trump." And that's what I think the Democratic Party needs to do. There needs to be policies like Medicare for all, like important policies that we need to have as American people as rights. Because if we don't have them, then what happens? We just elect them, and then what happens? They need to have a stance. Well, so that's just all I have to say, is just like, while they're running, if they have a stance, they are sure to win.
Well, I just want to, so we can agree to disagree on this, but I would say that Hillary Clinton's issues were policies that help working families, like paid family leave, paid sick leave, so that parents can be with their kids, whether they're adopted or they need to be having time with an elderly parent or a dying parent. I think choice was another, protecting reproductive access, reproductive health, and also preserving and expanding Obamacare. The thing that, I think that happened with that election was the same thing that happened with Trump in the primaries, which is he sucks all the air out of the room. So when and you've got the whole thing of, like talking about the media covering her emails and not her policies. Paid ads, I'm sure paid ads talked about those issues, but so I would say that the Democratic Party, and this is actually a criticism I hear on Morning Joe, and I hear people say the Democrats don't have a policy stance. Yeah, hell, fuck yeah, we do. Where do you want us to start? You want to talk to us about like passing the Voting Rights Act and reforming issues of redistricting or the federal vote issues? I mean, you want to talk about like raising the minimum wage for the first time? You want to talk about preserving and expanding, things like Obamacare, allowing for co-ops again, creating a market where you could have co-ops that function properly, fixing the problems with it so even more people can get access to it. But choice issues, yes, we want to make sure that women have access to abortion services, but they don't need them, hopefully, very often, because they have access to contraception through their employer's insurance, which Trump has taken away. We want to take back what Trump has given away from our national parks. We want to roll back the tax credits that these guys are passing. We want to pass net neutrality again so everyone has access to the internet. Yes, Democrats have these issues. Now, are we given time in the Trump era on television to talk about these issues, or are people always asking Democrats to react to Trump? And I think that's, and that's the function of the media. But I think it's not a problem of having the issues. I think we have the issues, we have the passion. I think the problem is finding ways to slide those in to conversations that are predominantly focused on criticizing or analyzing or talking about the president.
I think I should have phrased my criticism better than my criticism should rather be phrased as I think that there was like with Bernie Sanders, most people only talked about his policies because they were considered so far left. And so I was thinking my thoughts on this matter are, well, hey, they talked about his policies though. Think about it like that. If we push the Democrats just more to the left, even just slightly more, just to just single payer, if we just like add single payer to the actual party line, that could get people talking about it. Because
okay, yeah, I'm not arguing. I'm just going to throw in some context because I don't want to say I disagree with you. I think probably more often than not, people did talk about Bernie's policies like reforming Wall Street and free tuition and healthcare for all, because they're very left in terms of American politics, and sort of nationalizing or socializing things in that way. But I think the context for that, why were people talking about Bernie's policies? Well, it was because the Republicans had spent the previous 18 months churning up Benghazi over and over and over and over until they got the email story. And then they talked about Benghazi and the emails over and over. So Clinton sort of came into that primary having the Republicans knowing that she was going to be running and having 2 years head start with a taxpayer-funded smear campaign to keep an issue going, exploiting a tragedy for American service people and their families in order to bring down her numbers, because when she left as Secretary of State, her approval rating was in the 60s. And then post Benghazi, of course, it cratered. So, that was the other thing, that reason why Clinton had a hard time getting her message through was because the Republicans were sort of like throwing signal interference at her. Then we now know, too, that Putin was organizing and working against her. So she wasn't just running against Bernie or Donald. She was also running against, that sort of the Republican system and Putin trying to bring her down. So she kind of had a hard lift there. Hill.
Yeah, I can see that. It's just, let's just move on from this because this is just going to end up
going forward,
rotating.
But going forward, you're right. I think the policies are fantastic. They're right for American workers. They're right for American families. And because we do include identity politics, they aren't just directed at white coal miners working in West Virginia. They are urban families, rural families, people who don't have families, people with large families. I think the Democratic Party has an opportunity now, not only to sort of, be the party of those values, but to bring in people who actually hold those values. And this influx of new blood, I think that they're more sincere, they're less out for their own political gain than probably any political cohort of candidates we've seen. And so if we want real change, we need people in there who actually care about other people. And I think the Women's March and this energy we see from the left are bringing those people are standing up and saying, if not me, who? And if not now, when? And as an atheist, you just like, bless them all. I am grateful for every single one of them. And I do think that you can have real change when you have people who are doing it because they believe in the opportunities that democracy can provide.
Yeah, I can agree to that. One thing I have to say is we need to remember that going forward, if we want the Democrats to win, that all politics is in fact local. As Tip O'Neill once said, all politics is local, and that to even get forward, we have to start at the local level and build up, because to get the grassroots movement going, that's how it has to start. Well, this is what I mean. In 2018, we need to show up not only to the federal level, but we need to show up locally.
Right. Every election. Vote in every election. Vote in every election.
If you can, if there's no one else there and you can, put yourself in there.
Yeah, exactly. Because believe me, like, there's no special qualifications required to run for office. Other than residency and getting some signatures saying people want the opportunity to vote for this person on the ballot. So it's not a massive bar. You might be surprised that you walk in
How
there
low
and you
bar it actually is.
just yeah, just you read documents and you ask questions and it's fine. So right. Other things. Oh, we were going to talk. Yeah. So we were going to talk about some of your videos, I think. But were there any other topics before we moved off of anti-fascism that you wanted to bring up before we moved on?
You said let's just think over the topics that you mentioned you want to talk about. There was anti-fascism, anarchism, there
Yeah,
was
we didn't.
videos.
So why don't
Um,
we, since we're on politics, you want to go into anarchism and give me your, because as I said, it's not a body of political thought that I am deeply familiar with. And I wanted to take the opportunity to listen to somebody who knows more than me, because sometimes you're the teacher and sometimes you're the student. And tonight on the issue of anarchy, and from your perspective, I'm definitely the student. So you want to start with yeah, a primer and then your takes on things?
so from my position, anarchism is the rejection of all unjustified authority and uh just like so authority has to have a justification. If that justification cannot be given for like one reason or another, if there's not legitimate justification for the existence of that authority, it should be taken apart. So that's why I think that a democratic form of societal organization in democratizing the workplace, democratizing society as a whole, democratizing the way political systems work is the most core part of my view of anarchism, because just the market and in a sort of and without the use of a state, because as anarchists we view the state as tied to capitalism. There's a difference in the anarchist definition of the state between the common definition of the state and the anarchist definition of the state. There can be a governing body of an area without there being a state.
Okay, you're going really fast.
Sorry, that was.
That's okay. No. I said primer, so I kind of put pressure on you. But you said a word, and I really want you to unpack the word a lot because I find it intriguing. You said justified power.
So the way
And yes, please talk
so the
about
way
the.
justification of power. Noam Chomsky put it in one of the best examples I can give, in that if you have a child running into a street, a parent can use justified authority to save the child's life and prevent them from going on the street by demanding they come back. But if you have, for example, a boss just skimming money off of a worker, just taking profits from a worker when the worker was the one who created the value of the product, that is something we call unjustified authority, where the boss has power for absolutely no reason other than their own gain.
Okay, I guess when I thought about power, I was thinking more like power structures in a company or power structures in a society. Like, does a police officer have the right to tell somebody not to cross against a red light, justified in terms of an anarchist theory of power?
Well, the way that would work is the way policing would work is a completely different structure. Police as a current structure are designed to subjugate. In the anarchist view, they're designed to maintain the system of the status quo and of liberal capitalism, and of liberal democracy, in the sense that is not direct democracy and is not democratic workplaces and is not essentially in any way the society we want to live in. The way this works is that police, in the sense of the modern sense, are a occupying presence in many societies. In some functions, they are justified. In, for example, if someone is a threat to other people's lives, they are justified in their authority. But if they are someone committing a say someone commits a petty crime and the police uses lethal force, that is completely unjustified. The police shouldn't have the authority to be judge, jury, and executioner. That's something. So essentially, have the police, instead of functioning to protect private property in the anarchist and socialist sense, where private property is the means of production and wealth, um, instead police protect personal, like people's lives and people's personal property, which is sort of people's like house things they own, essentially protecting people instead of essentially policing. Essentially, the way an anarchist society would be, it wouldn't even be called police. They'd sort of be a organized militia of citizens who would protect each other in the place where they live. But this idea would be that these people would be sort of functioning like the police, but they protect people, not profits.
Okay. So I'm gonna just because I don't know, so I'm not trying to challenge you. I'm more and not even playing devil's advocate. I'm just kind of wondering how this all goes together. So if it is the case, and first there's one point that I want to make and get into, which is it seems like justified is a collective decision, not an individual one, but we have to come back to that because I want to make this other point first. Let's say you have a situation where you have a society where the police protect humans' lives, things like that, but not private property. And a member of that community who is rich has their house burned down due to arson. Now they're going to experience a personal harm because of that loss of property. So how would you resolve the tension between a society where the person, in this case, holding the person accountable for ruining this person's life, and the notion that private property itself is not something that falls within the regulation of what a community should protect?
Well, the idea that the means of production will be private in the society is something that is not going to be present. The means of production will be collectivized and communally owned. So there wouldn't be a reason for someone to be able to have such a massive surplus value, such a massive amount of accumulated capital above everyone else. It wouldn't make sense because the society is based on a more of an economic power where it's distributed where the power of the economic power is distributed evenly, as opposed to just like the economic outcome, where so everyone has a sort of economic power equal to each other, and that the economic power isn't created in money, but in more of a gift economy or a right to well-being, where you get a right to food, a right to water, a right to housing, a right to healthcare, and these sorts of things are not commodified, and then the production commodities created out of the means of production are simply there for a sort of almost gift economy where it's you take as you to each according to their need, from each according to their ability to each according to their need, is sort of this idea where you take what you need and you make what you can to sort of contribute to society, as opposed to someone accumulating massive amounts of wealth in this anarchist society, because I personally believe that right-wing anarchism cannot function as a possible society, or an anarchism where its functions are based on capital. I do not believe that can function. An anarchism where functions are based on socialism and the idea that people will democratically run the workplace and have their right to well-being and have their right to exist and such, that is how I believe it can function.
Okay, let me revise my thought experiment. Let's give the society that you've just set up, right? Same situation of arson. But in this case, the people lived, they escaped, but all of their belongings were destroyed, right? And now in that economy, you would still have people's own personal things. They would have their own toothbrush, they would have maybe their own art, maybe they collect books that are their own. And that would be private property. So again, I would pose the tension of, property. Well, what's the difference?
Personal property is the things you own. Private property is specifically the means of production and the way that like things work. So like a farm, a factory, like things that can accumulate capital, things that can make value. Not in the sense of like, oh, this can be sold for value as a commodity, but more of that this thing makes commodities. This thing makes value of commodities, and this thing makes labor turn into these things. That's the sort of idea that what private property is in the socialist sense.
Okay. So yes, getting back to, thank you for answering my questions. I have no more on this line of of thought, but yeah, getting back to the notion of justification and to the point that I raised before I went into my example, justification, therefore, it sounds like in some ways there is a collective determination of what is and isn't justified that's then binding on everybody in the community. Is that right?
It's more of consensus building in the community of what is justifiable and what isn't. And the community will be in a fluid motion of meetings and giving and taking on what is justified, what is not justified. And it's sort of an agreement between all of them in a consensus building sort of style, where you make agreements and you make caveats and you make sort of things. It's essentially direct democracy in communal systems, and there could be ways of structuring it on federal levels where you have sort of some federal structures that are sort of organize these things together to communicate, but nothing really beyond the sort of basic right to well-being, structuring the sort of federal idea, and then the communities themselves in these sort of like organizations could like actually decide like the individual like ways their society works.
But would there, okay, so in that sort of system, would decisions not take effect until a 100% consensus would be reached, or would there be a justifiable point at which so many people wanted something that it was just deemed to be the good, so like 90% agreement, a supermajority?
The goal is usually 100%, but 90% is most often acceptable amongst anarchists in consensus building. But I think that like consensus building is just something important. You can always go with just a simple majority, but then people will say that's unfair. And so I would agree with that, where you want to just you want to keep working at it until most people agree, if not all people agree.
And then how would you reconsider like previous decisions? Would there be appeal processes, or would it be required to
say a previous decision or a current decision is like something someone would die for and wants to change? They could use something considered as a block tool, where it's like saying, I would literally die over this decision if it came to that, and they would have to reconsider and like keep talking until something is more favorable is arranged. And whenever something wants to be re-brought up, someone can just bring it back up in this type of society, ideally, so that they can keep working at it.
And how would capital investment work? So collecting enough money, basically capital investment, gathering enough social funds.
My headphones just unplugged.
Oh, that's all right.
You can have to restart the sentence. I'll tell you when my headphones are plugged.
No worries at all. I'll just babble along and say, hey, everyone who's listening, I'm going to have my patron hangout at 7 p.m. my time, because Steve Shies is having his when I would have mine, which is noon Eastern. So I'm going to have mine at 1 Eastern, that's 7 in my time, 6 in the UK, I think. But yeah, that's going to be going up tomorrow. So are you back?
Yeah, I'm back.
Excellent. I filled time. There was no dead air.
So your question was about?
What was my question about? I'll have to go back and watch and listen. Oh, because I went on a different thought stream. I kind of lost the tangent. I remember we talked about the appeals process. Oh yeah, and then you talked about the block thing. Nah, it's gone. Okay, so justified refers to a power and okay, so
it's power of consent. It's all about consent.
Right. And then how would consent work in the workplace in terms of like, yeah, like if you got paid, how you got paid, would everyone get paid the same? Would people be able to get bonuses? Would there be incentive systems? Would it be a flat rate for all jobs? I mean, in terms of what would that look like?
There would be a certain thing in socialist concepts. There's something called labor voucher, but in anarchist things, there are also things called gift economies, where you simply contribute to, if it's not already an automated job, you work your job. And there is democratic workplace structure where all the workers run the workplace and they all take part in it. And with this sort of thing, with this democratic structure, the payment is usually with labor vouchers. It would be based on the hour based on the common rate for the commodity production of like how much an hour's worth is, and you'd get that many hours worth of labor vouchers or so, and you could trade that in for commodities. But in a gift economy, which is something I think I would advocate for, but I'm not sure yet if I do, it would be you produce commodities and they're given and they're just owned by the community, and then whoever needs them will just like sign in the community, I needed to take this for this reason, and that's why I needed this. And then they would take it, and then they would also just like contribute, and then say someone else needs to do this, or they want to feel like they want to contribute back. They would go and work in a workplace where they can have a say, and then contribute to another commodity being produced that's given back into the gift sort of pile, I guess.
But that doesn't really take into account skill sets and expertise.
well, skill sets and expertise are more based around the idea is getting to a society at a point where all non-skilled labor is automated into a point where where we don't have to do it, and people just take what commodities they need. And for skilled labor is done out of the done more out of the both the both the love of the craft and the and there might be a system in which there could be justification for if you say you have like a skill like you're an expert surgeon or something. Say that that's the case. As a surgeon, you could be like, I don't know, people will like I guess like barter their artisan skills with you, or just like you your services are like a right to people as a surgeon. But say like you're an artist, well, there could be like, I don't know, uh, you would I think in my position you'd be producing art for the love of art, and you could either give it to people or people could just trade. Like if it were a labor voucher system, they could give you labor vouchers. But if it were like in a gift economy, I don't really see. I think art would be a more a gift thing, whereas an artisan skill set that you just pursue out of the love of it.
So I'm okay. I mean, I'm just sort of going through again. These are new ideas to me, and so I'm processing them and thinking about them as you're talking. One of the things that kind of comes across is that anarchism requires a lot of fucking meetings. And
yes, it does. That's the only downside. You have to talk a lot to people.
and
It's not like
yeah.
authoritarian socialism where you get to like just like say from on high, this is what this is and this is what this is. It's a lot of consensus building, so that's why it's based on like a lot on the local level, and that's what my stance of all politics being local also reflects on. I learned that from Tip O'Neill in American politics in terms of like American liberal democracy, but it also applies to the way socialist societies can be structured, that all politics is local. Trying to do more than local levels, you can only do very simple things like saying like all people have a right to well-being or something like that. If you want to get to the nitty-gritty, you have to talk on all politics is local.
Yeah, yes. But I'm just saying that there are people like I actually don't want to go and hear a bunch of people's dumb opinions in a room for 4 hours, once a week. And I think, I'm just like on a practical level, this isn't a theoretical critique, just a human nature. And I think, the idea of a fully automated society blows my mind. Like that is not even something that kind of I consider as part of my worldview. And there's a whole bunch of challenges to that, just in terms of like first world and developing world disparities and what it would require to actually in terms of problems we solve first. But the idea that we could have what you're talking about is basically like a leisure society.
Yeah, that's the goal ultimately. But the idea of, while we're in process to getting there, we also live in the digital age where there might not need to be a meetings on things. There could be simply like say like the vote's not until like Friday, but people can talk in this chat forum, like leave their ideas and like things, and then when the meeting's on Friday, only people who really feel like they need to show up will show up, but you can all vote from a distance or something. That's something that is possible, but I don't know if it'd be practical. But you can also just show up to vote and not show up to do the consensus building, or you could show up to vote and then show up to do the talking after when the votes are counted.
But a society where everything was automated, or basic functions were automated, surely what that would end up doing is producing massive amounts of consumption, because people would have more free time. So people who win the lottery and don't know what to do with themselves because they don't really have to work for anything anymore. But they're so what if the preference isn't to create art but to sit and play video games or watch soap opera, Jerry Springer reruns, or just sit around and get high? That all requires a massive amount of consumption. I'm just kind of wondering, certainly there are massive ecological challenges that would come from a system like that.
I'm currently working on getting through the works of Murray Bookchin, who talks about all these ecological problems with an automated system. And so I'm not fully aware of like how to tackle that, but I think Bookchin, from what I've read so far, is tackling it pretty well. So I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, fair enough. You're handling all the questions I'm throwing at you. So I don't even feel like it's an oral defense. This is a bit what Aviva, well, of course, but more on your own original research kind of thing. But yeah, I just keep getting peppered with questions. I hope that's okay.
Yeah.
but you're doing great. So thank you. I'm finding it very interesting. Yeah. So anything else that you want to talk about? And yeah, in terms of that,
I
moving
think we
on.
covered a basic primer, but like, yeah, just remembering that it's all about justification and consent, and the consent of the governed and consent of the people who live, and a right to well-being is like what I'd focus on for anarchism.
Well, thank you very much. It was very enlightening for me, and I hope for people who didn't know much about anarchism
So,
also.
did you want to talk about my videos now, or?
Yeah. Should we talk? Do you want to go like? I think the two that I wanted to talk about were Mouthy Booty, which you talked about a little bit, but then also the one that you did on women of the art.
Right.
Yeah. So which one would you do? You want to go back to Mouthy Buddha, or you want to?
I'm fine with going to either first. You choose.
Okay, let's go chronological reverse. So Mouthy Buddha.
Okay, so Mouthy Buddha with the video, when the original JQ videos Mouthy Buddha release came out, I only knew him from the reference that H Bomb made to him in his second response, for the Bill Nye video. But then he released these sort of JQ videos, and there was all these sort of things, this incriminating evidence that just like painted him as very clearly slipping into the alt-right, if not already there. And so from this point forward, that's when I decided that I would personally want to tackle this, but I also want to. I saw that he had a very glossy sort of matte finish on his things that were just shitty ideas, and so I focused on that because he has like this. He apparently, people think his editing is very good, and I don't think so, and that's why I made like that whole first bit where I like mock his editing and then I make fun of his like abilities to do so, because
it looks great. It looks great, by the way.
Because I thought it'd be best to do that.
Yeah, I mean, people really should go watch the visuals in the video, and also the humor in it, but in the pacing, as you said.
Yeah, and then I also made sure I kept at a very fast pace, because I noticed that Mouthy Buddha's videos are very slow with their pacing, and I did not want that to happen. And I always keep like a relatively fast visual pace, because if I don't have a fast visual pace, what do I do? And so with the Mouthy Buddha video, I also thought that another important thing to talk about would be to talk about how the whole JQ thing works, and how IQ is like focused around school children's abilities to score on tests, as opposed to actual applicable things that really like are important in society. And it's like very much just a thing that was designed to gauge where school children are, instead of like this whole defining thing of society and how that works.
Yeah, and people who do psychology and have studied or read up on intelligence testing and the concept of it and the difficulties of it and the debates within it would know it's not a simple measure that everyone agrees upon.
Yeah, and in fact, in my personal view from my studies, I find that the most effective system is, in describing it, is the system of the different kinds of intelligence, where there's like the multiple different kinds of intelligence that are there, where there's like creative intelligence and like sort of all these different types of intelligence that are qualifiable.
Right. Yeah, so that's a great video. I've already linked to your channel in the description box, so people can go and watch that there. And
a video that you might have a difficulty watching is the video I made called "Wives with a Purpose." Purpose in air quotes, one literal quotes, but purpose as a reference to the alt-right personality, wife with a purpose. But the idea is I'm tackling alt-right women in that video. While you can still watch the mirror on Kevin Logan's channel in anywhere, you cannot watch in some countries the version on my channel, because there was a false flagging campaign that said it was that I don't know who it was from, but they declared my video to be hate speech, even though it was a video about education about hate speech and hate groups. But in that video, that took like a whole month of research and like a long time, because it was very much about tackling like the history, and the further back I went, the more I found in the relations of like women involved in fascism. And me and my co-writer spent hours and hours and hours researching on this. And the end result is that like we ended up with a video that was very much I have critiques of it because like I tried to say that like one type of oppression was worse than another in in one part in that, but it didn't come across right. I didn't mean to say that. Like it sounded like that. I said that where I said that white supremacy and is worse than misogyny. I meant that in a way that they compound on each other instead of rather than one is worse than the other on its own. And so it's just like, but like another important topic I talked about in that video was the idea that like the personalities of these women in the alt-right, they're very much self-subservient in the idea that they want to be out there, and people want to see them, they want to see women in their movement, and that it's important to have women in their movement legitimizing them beyond them just being a bunch of sad, lonely guys. They want to have women in the movement legitimizing them, that it can attract anyone, quote unquote, and that there's like other people there. But this idea is that they can apparently be these independent people who will advocate for these things, but then they'll also act self-subserviently enough so that they're still tolerated by the alt-right. And even then, the sort of MGTOW, sort of post-MGTOW faction of them hate the fact that they're even there because they resent women and hate them.
It is a sort of there is cognitive dissonance to say, yes, women should, be having babies, but I want to wait until I'm in love, and I want to wait until this, and basically sort of citing all of the liberal or the liberties, I should say, that feminism has provided. And saying, I want to sort of have my cake and eat it too. I want to use feminist opportunities, but then tell other women that they should be getting on with it. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of critiques there, but the blowback that the question is creating in the white supremacy, the sort of misogynist community, is interesting to see sort of who's falling on which side and what arguments that they're trying to make to justify their positions.
Yeah, and it's very absurd watching these women bend over backwards to just justify their sort of these sort of ideas that they have, where they where they'll just, like, as you said, they'll take every liberty that they got out of feminism, but then they'll also decry feminism as this evil thing that is going to end up destroying the West, and not realizing the irony in them saying that where they can even say that.
Right. Precisely. So that's another excellent video that I would recommend. And if
you can't see it on my channel, go watch it on Kevin Logan's channel. He has a mirror of it on his channel.
Exactly. Right. Yes. And I'm hoping somebody will do a kind of a mocking version of the Jewish question, but the woman question, featuring this debate in the alt-right community. I think that's
I think the Golden One has done that already.
Well, no, but doing a parody of
it,
of the Jewish question, but as the woman question.
I get
a critique, of their inner debate. I think that would be funny. I don't have time to do it, but somebody more clever and funny than me should do that. There you go. Free idea, anybody, if you want to start a channel. I think we've been going for like an hour and a half. So we can probably wrap this up, because that's a good amount of time. It's a podcast conversation. So I think people will get to the end. Yeah, just don't leave just yet. Stick around, because then we'll have a little chat. Okay, good. But right, thank you guys in the audience, the 38 viewers who joined us for this conversation. I'm sorry I'm not going to get to the chat. It's been a long 90 minutes, and I've been thinking really hard. I hope you've enjoyed my, at least, learned from this podcast. You didn't mind my newbie questions, being the student in the Hangout. I really found it very interesting, and I learned a lot. So thank you guys for your time and attention. I've been Christy. You've been awesome. Sonia's been awesome. And all that's left to be said is goodbye from me and goodbye from Sonia. Say goodbye.
Bye.
Hi, guys.